Up next, you're going to meet the head of the Royal Ontario Museum. Janet Carding is here in the studio today. Hello, I'm Shannon Skinner, and this is Extraordinary Women TV. Now, Janet Carding is the director and CEO of the Royal Ontario Museum. She's got a great story of success that's sure to inspire you, so stay with us for it. Later in the segment, before we take a break, I'll have my regular Good to Know Minute when I ask my guests for their top success tip, and you'll hear Janet's. Well, hello, Janet. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you for having me here.
Now, you are the first female director of the ROM. Congratulations. How does that feel?
Well, you know, it feels great. The ROM is a fantastic museum, but it's got a long and distinguished history. And so to be the first female director after nearly 100 years of existence, it felt like quite an interesting moment for me. I'd never really thought about being a female leader of a museum before, because actually I've worked with a lot of female museum directors in the past. And actually, if you look around Canada, there have been female museum directors in a range of different organisations. Many of the top museum directors at the moment are women. And so I felt like I was joining a club. But when I arrived here, people said, my goodness, you're the first woman director of the ROM. That's big news in and of itself. So I started to think about what that meant. And the fantastic thing is that it's made me take much more seriously the idea of how I can be a role model to other women, because I get a lot of women, particularly women starting out in their career who'd like to work in museums, who come and ask me about what it's like and what I do and what I could recommend for them. And I don't think they'd do that unless I was the first women director of the ROM.
So what, in terms of a male-female ratio split, those working in museums in Canada, is it 50-50, the ratio, would you say? I mean,
do you know, I haven't counted it, but
just out of curiosity.
I think it probably is around 50-50.
Yeah.
Like many professions, there tend to be more men in some of the senior roles. So most of my senior management team are men, but we're a great team and we work well together. But if I look around the country, there's a woman who heads up the Museum of Fine Arts in Montreal. There's a great woman who runs up the Vancouver Art Gallery. We've just had a great leader of the Royal British Columbia Museum. She's just retired, but then she's been replaced by a man. So I think it probably is about 50-50.
Now, you've been in Toronto for about 2 years now. Mm-hmm. You started your career in England.
Yes.
You moved to Australia, working with various museums. What do you love about Toronto the most?
I think what I like about Toronto is that it's a really welcoming place. Any city that is made up of more than 50% people who weren't born in Canada is geared around the idea that new arrivals are made very welcome, and that was no exception for me. And I think I was particularly lucky because the ROM has a profile within the community, and so a lot of people sought me out. A lot of people made sure that I was made very welcome. But I think it's a real characteristic of Canadian culture, from what I know, and something which is I've tried to carry forward for the ROM itself. We talk at the ROM about the idea that everybody belongs there and that we always try and make sure that everybody gets a warm welcome. And I think that in doing so, we're honouring the Canadian tradition, and we're also doing something which is absolutely right for now.
Now, what is the importance of museums in our culture today?
Well, that's one of the questions that everybody is asking, and every time I go to a conference or I meet with other directors, that's the question that we're all talking about, because the world's changing very rapidly around us, and many of our museums, and the ROM included, we were formed either in the 19th century or the beginning of the 20th century, and at that point it was very different. If you think back to when the ROM first opened its doors, and that was in 1914, it's actually our centennial next year, at that point, if you wanted to know something about ancient Egyptian history, say, the ROM was really the only place that you could come and find out that information. And you had to come through the door. There wasn't any online, of course, but it was even before television or before radio. And so the only way that you could experience things from different ages or things from around the world was by coming to a museum. And the curators of the museum were the absolute authority on those things. There were very few other ways that you could get that information. Even books were relatively rare and relatively expensive, and you might have to order them from a library. And so if you think about the way that we now get information, we're drowning in it. It's all around us. And museums, instead of being the only place where you can get information, now we're competing for people's time. But what I think a museum can do now is we can be the place that you can trust. at a time when there's all of this information around, we still are a place where we have experts. We've got people who've devoted their life to learning about a particular area. We've got people who are generating new knowledge now. For instance, we have curators who go out to 30 different countries around the world, whether they're archaeologists or anthropologists or zoologists. They're bringing back new knowledge here to Toronto. So what I've been thinking is really a museum now is about a meeting place where people can come together and you can ask questions of those people that you can trust. And now, of course, you can do that online. You can do that physically in the building. You can do that because we might come out to you. So we've got a different role, but I think it's a role that makes sense and makes sense with this world that we're living in now.
Do you remember that moment when you said, I want to work in a museum?
Yes, because it was actually the day that I started working in a museum. Like many people who work in museums, sometimes you fall into this idea. So I was an academic historian of science. That's what I studied as an undergraduate at university back in the UK. And I looked around armed with my degree in the history of science and I thought, what am I going to do now? And there was an advertisement in the newspaper for a junior curatorial position at the Science Museum. And I thought, well, my degree would stand me in good stead for that. So I went and I had an interview for the job and actually came second. I didn't get the job. So I went away thinking, never mind, I'll do something else. And then I got a phone call a few weeks later saying that the person who they'd offered the job to wasn't going to take it, and would I be interested in the job? And that was the point where I thought, you know, actually I would like to work in a museum. By that point, having gone through the recruitment process, I'd started to be smitten by this idea that museums could be these fun places to work in, but also could be a place which we could really do something that would be exciting for the people who came in through the door to see what we'd got. So that was the day that I decided that I'd work in a museum. That was 20-something years ago now, and I've been doing it ever since.
Now, of course, you work with dinosaur bones, or in a building that houses dinosaur bones and mummies and the most interesting artifacts. What's your favorite? Do you have a favorite artifact in the ROM?
I think it changes quite a bit because the ROM is an encyclopedia. We have collections from all around the world, and we have collections from all different ages, and we have scientific collections and we have cultural collections. Right now, and it's been one of my favourites for the last few months, is one of the stone camels that's part of our Chinese collection. It's actually a life-size camel, and it's kneeling down, and it's part of a pair, and it's just a fabulous object. It works whether you are an expert in Chinese art or whether you're walking in through the door for the first time and you're seeing that and you're thinking, I know exactly what that is. It works whether you're a child, it works whether you're an adult, and there's just something rather splendid about an artifact that's lasted for such a long time and has been carved by an artist who knew that this was going to be something that would endure. I think that's rather special.
Now, Janet, we have to take a break, and that means it's my good to know minute, and I know you've got a great success tip.
Well, my success tip is, I think it's always good to stay very, very solid and grounded in what you do and to be very clear about what you can control and what you can't control. And I say that because in my job, no 2 days are ever the same. And every single day I find myself going into work thinking I've got particular issues to tackle. And I do tackle those issues, but a whole load more besides. And I think what's really clear in those circumstances is thinking about things where you are right now. You know where you're going, but you might have to go sideways before you can actually move ahead towards it. So be really grounded, be really clear what you can and can't do, but think about shaking up the tactics when circumstances change.
And that's good to know, and thanks for that. Well, we're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, more on Extraordinary Women TV. So stay where you are. Welcome back to Extraordinary Women TV. I'm Shannon Skinner, and I'm speaking with Janet Carding. She is the director and CEO of the Royal Ontario Museum here in Toronto. Thoroughly enjoying this conversation. Now, for you, you've had a long-standing career working in museums. I mean, what has been the highlight of your life thus far?
Wow, it's hard to pick out one. I think for me, I've been involved in a couple of really big projects, and a project that takes several years to complete. And then in museum terms, you know, you see people actually experiencing what you've talked about and thought about and experimented around for a long time. That's a wonderful moment. And I've been really privileged that that's happened twice to me so far. It's happened many times with individual exhibitions, but two major projects. When I was at the Science Museum in London, we built an extension, the Welcome Wing, and that was all about the future of science when the rest of the museum was devoted to the history of science. And it was for all ages. And we'd worked on an area called Pattern Pod, which was for under 8s to learn about science. So this was no words, this was all about shapes and patterns and classifying. And the first day, when the whole area filled up with strollers and with parents and everybody was just full on enjoying the exhibits, was magical. And then when I moved to Australia, similarly, I got to do what I really have wanted to do for my whole career, which is open a dinosaur gallery. Because dinosaurs Dinosaurs in ancient Egypt are the two most popular things that people like to do in museums.
That's so interesting.
Great thing about the ROM, we have both. But back to Australia, we opened a new dinosaur gallery there, and it was just fantastic. Again, we had some wonderful specimens, we had some great technology. We brought the stories to life of how do scientists know how dinosaurs lived and how do we put all of that together. And we created something which, when you saw the look on the families' faces as they walked through the exhibition, it was just magical. It was really magical. And so that's what makes it all worthwhile. Those are the real highlights for me. But every time we put on a program, or every time we create something online, or every time we have a new gallery, you get that same feeling. Success for us in museums is really measured in the experiences that we create for people.
Well, museums are just wonderfully inspiring, aren't they? I mean, if you're looking for a dose of inspiration, go and hang out in your local museum.
Absolutely, absolutely. And so there's no one way, there's no right answer for a museum. The only thing is having the confidence to walk in through the door and decide that you're going to enjoy yourself. A lot of people sometimes feel intimidated about coming to museums, but actually they don't need to, because it's not that you need to know about things before you come. You're going to go away having had a great time and also learnt something along the way. And so it's just about enjoying yourself.
So if there was a historical figure that's no longer with us today, and you could meet them, who would that person be?
You know, I'd love to meet Elizabeth I. I think that she, in a time when it was very hard for women to achieve very much at all, she achieved a huge amount. You know, she's somebody who's highly thought of right to this day. She was able to safeguard her country, she was able to lead people, she was an amazing warrior and a great politician and tactician and strategist. I think it would be great to have a conversation with her.
So what's next for you then?
Well, next year is our centennial. As I mentioned, we're going to be 100 years old, and that's a...
Congratulations.
Thank you. That's a great moment in the life of the ROM, because we'll be able to take stock of everything that we've achieved by having this fantastic museum at the heart of this city. And also we'll be able to look forward 100 years. We'll be able to think, what do we need to be doing now so that we're still being successful in another 100 years' time. So that's the next thing that I'm thinking about, that project to reinvent the museum and reconsider what a museum is in the 21st century goes on. And for me, you know, I will continue to do this as long as people will have me. I think it's, I haven't found anything else that I'd like to do more, and I really get a huge amount of pleasure from working with museums, working with the people who work there and are passionate about the collections, but also working with the people who we see every day enjoying themselves.
So Janet, for anyone who wants to find out more information about you and the museum on the internet, where should they go?
Well, I'm on Twitter. I tweet as the director and CEO, if that's the right expression.
Yeah, that is.
I also on the ROM website. There's a lot of information there about the museum, and occasionally I've been known to blog as well, so you can seek me out there. And of course, anybody's welcome to write to me, courtesy of the Royal Ontario Museum, and I'll do my best to answer their letters.
Well, thank you so much for being here today. I've enjoyed this conversation and getting to know you and more about the ROM and more about museums in our society. So I wish you all the best in all that you do.
Well, great, and thank you very much for the chance to chat to you about this. As you can tell, I love talking about museums, and it's great to have this opportunity.
Well, thank you. I've been speaking with Janet Carding. She is the director and CEO of the Royal Ontario Museum. So do check out the website. If you are interested in finding out more about the show, past guests, past episodes, more about me, and contacting me, I'd encourage you to visit my website at extraordinarywomentv.com. And I also provide lots of updates on Twitter, so follow me on Twitter. Well, if you are interested in transforming your life, I hope these stories have inspired you. You've been watching Extraordinary Women TV. I'm Shannon Skinner. See you soon.